The Doctor Who adventure games gave us the opportunity to explore a well-detailed and largely accurate recreation of the Matt Smith-era TARDIS interior. While it's not flawlessly exact, it's certainly a fascinating thing to study, and you can tell the developers had access to good reference material of the real set and weren't just working from episode screenshots the way a fan-made version might. This digital set continued to be improved and refined over the course of the 5 games, and it's that progression that is the focus of this video. The earliest version of the TARDIS interior that made it into the games in any way is a low-resolution panoramic image that can be just barely seen in the windows of the TARDIS exterior prop. The way the image moves seems like it's meant to simulate reflections on the glass, but it's a picture of the inside of the TARDIS and not reflecting what's outside, so that doesn't really make sense. I don't think the developers wanted us to look at it this closely. Looking at it more closely, we can see how this picture appears to have been taken before the set was even finished. Prominent features are missing, namely the back wall opposite the doors, as well as the central console itself. You can also see that the gaps in the set, which normally would fade into the shadows, are instead brightly highlighted by an orange background, which makes it very obvious exactly where the confines of the set are even in this low-resolution image. Also on the TARDIS exterior prop, we can see a screenshot of the mostly finished interior being used as the backdrop that can be glimpsed through the doors when they open. This is mostly as it appears in the finished game, save for some minor shading problems that are yet to be corrected. Next, we come to the oldest version of the TARDIS that actually exists in the game as a full-fledged 3D environment, and that is the version we see in the beta version of Episode 1. The beta for City of the Daleks was made available to the public 3 days before the release of the final build, and it's almost completely identical. You could easily play both versions back to back and not notice any differences, but some of the few small changes that do exist are to do with the TARDIS interior. City of the Daleks has no gameplay inside the TARDIS. It's only used in non-interactive cutscenes, but the cutscenes are performed in real time in the game instead of being pre-rendered videos, so the set is still physically there, tucked away underneath the map. The set is completely static in the beta, with none of the moving parts on the console that we see in the finished version. The beta hadn't added the scanner screen on the wall yet either, so there's just a big hole in the wall where that's supposed to go. Some of the controls on the console have had slight color swaps, such as the keys on this keyboard, and the space backdrop outside the doors has a different texture. This backdrop outside the TARDIS interior set wouldn't see any on-screen use until Episode 3, but it is already in place from Episode 1 onwards out of bounds. The starscape scene in the beta is replaced with a brightly colored nebula in the final version, and it's this nebula texture that eventually gets used. One of the staircases leading up and out of sight is cut short by these closely stacked together translucent black sheets in the beta, with an opaque black sheet behind them. At a guess, this was probably meant to exaggerate the impression of the staircase receding into shadow, but it hasn't quite worked out that way because the translucent sheets don't darken each other to make a gradient the way it looks like they were intended to. In the final build, this was mostly removed by taking out the opaque sheet behind them and letting you see the full staircase. None of the staircases in this TARDIS lead to anywhere interesting, they all dead end as soon as they're out of shot. In the final build, some of the machinery on the console was replaced with higher detailed animated versions of themselves. There's these squishy pump things between the panels, and these little doohickeys over here, and these thermometer looking thingamabobs, and the atom accelerator. Oh, where's it gone? Yes, some detail has actually gone missing between the beta and the final build, and this is one example. Also missing is the typewriter and the handle of the zigzag plotter lever, and the transparency of the textures for these wires underneath the panels has become messed up somewhere along the way. The tape recorder has been improved with a proper clear case over animated reels instead of being an opaque box with the reels textured on top, but eagle-eyed viewers might notice there's a slight problem. The rotation of the plastic case is now completely whack. By far the most interesting addition in the TARDIS between the beta and the final builds of City of the Daleks is that in the final version, the master screwdriver of all things is now plugged into the TARDIS console, hidden out of shot, in the same port where the Doctor's screwdriver was originally dispensed from. This does not factor into the plot of City of the Daleks in the slightest. In fact, it appears to be here because of something that happens in a later episode of the adventure games. We'll touch on that when we get there, but it's interesting to see evidence of them planning for the TARDIS set in later episodes, even as early as the beginning of Episode 1. In some thoughtful attention to detail, the screwdriver is only here in the beginning cutscene, where there are no camera angles where it would be visible. In the ending cutscene, where the sonic screwdriver port is visible in this shot here, it's been removed. It could be a coincidence, but I'm more inclined to believe this is someone's deliberate effort to avoid the continuity error that would be created by showing the screwdriver plugged into the console before the part where we put it there. In Blood of the Cybermen, the TARDIS is also seen exclusively in cutscenes and can't be explored, but there are remnants under the hood to suggest that wasn't always the case during development. A very short gameplay segment inside the TARDIS was on the cards at one point. First of all, the TARDIS interior in this game has had collision added to it. Glitchy and unfinished collision that's easy to get stuck on, but collision nonetheless. This is important because in City of the Daleks, the TARDIS could only be explored with the game physics turned off, as there was no solid floors or walls for the Doctor to land on, clearly not designed to be a playable space of any kind. So the fact that the developers went out of their way to add it in for Blood of the Cybermen is telling, even if the TARDIS continues to be a cutscene-only area in the finished version of the game. This piece of cut content is confirmed by the presence of an unused script in the game's files for an interaction point on one of the panels of the console for a scene that could only have been here at the end of Act 1 when the Doctor connects a sat-nav to the TARDIS. In the finished game, this is taken care of with a very slapdash cutscene in which the Doctor walks up to the console with a move command and in-game pathfinding rather than any handcrafted animation. This appears to be a hastily put together replacement for the original intention, which was to have you walk up to the console yourself and use the sat-nav on the interaction point to start the rewiring minigame. Something you can just barely see in-game thanks to this brief shot here is a plain white square on one of the control panels. This is the panel which the Doctor interacts with in the finished game's cutscene, and is almost certainly related to the unused interaction point that was supposed to go here, perhaps a placeholder of some kind. Oh, and one more thing before we move on, it's worth pointing out that the Master Screwdriver is not present in this version of the TARDIS. Episode 3 of the adventure games is a short interlude that takes place almost entirely inside the TARDIS, which means they needed to improve the console room set to stand up to much closer scrutiny. The most immediately apparent change is that the lighting is now slightly more colorful, which is certainly a step in the right direction, but is still very blandly lit compared to how it is in the show. The scanner screen is now switched on, with some kind of screensaver playing, and the scissor lift mechanism for the smaller scanner screen on the console is now gold rather than the chrome silver was in previous versions. It's also a three-dimensional object now, an upgrade from the flat texture they used in the first two episodes. There are new light bars underneath the stairs, except for this one where the lights only go about halfway up the staircase. And on the subject of this staircase, the fading into shadow effect, which was partially removed before, is now completely gone. This time, rather than trying to hide the fact the staircase doesn't go anywhere, they've extended the set so it actually does go somewhere. But of course, it still doesn't lead anywhere interesting. There's only enough stuff back here to fill in the view from the bottom of the staircase and nothing more. This staircase also has an extension of the set to lead towards rather than just going into blackness. There's some newly added blue lighting coming out from there, as well as up here on the stairs that go past the scanner screen. The curved walls now have secondary walls behind them which are visible through the holes in the roundels, lit with orange lights between the two layers. This is a major improvement and goes a long way to capturing the look of the TARDIS in the show. The underside of the console panels, as well as underneath the glass floor, also have more blue lighting, and turning to the console itself, this has had the most care put into it. The transparency issues on the blue wires are fixed, the tape recorder's had its rotation fixed, and all the components on the console that have gone missing since the City of the Daleks beta have been re-added. Though the changes from the first two episodes are subtle, the more you look, the more you can see how much extra effort they put into touching up the set for episode 3. Last thing before we finish up with episode 3, this is the point where the Master Screwdriver finally comes into play. Amy needs it to connect to the TARDIS for technobabble reasons as a minor part of the plot. Episode 4 is The Shadows of the Vashta Nerada, and that has no scenes inside the TARDIS, so we'll be skipping that one. And so lastly, we come to the Gunpowder Plot, the final out of the 5 games. If you've played the Gunpowder Plot, most likely your strongest memory of the TARDIS is the part where you can wander in and out as you please, marveling at how it really is bigger on the inside than on the outside. We'll come to that in a moment, but first, there are a few more modifications in the console room to go over. The gramophone horn attached to the console has a new, more reflective material to it. More of the roundels have the silver centerpieces that were previously left open. The funny little overhead light thing above the doors has been added. The doormat is now metallic copper like the wall next to it for some reason. That copper wall is shinier. The hat stand is introduced. These roundels in the copper wall are now sunken in rather than just being part of the textures, and the lights inside have glare effects added. The vertical lamps on the glass floor are now switched on. There are modifications to the lower level underneath the glass floor to improve its accuracy. The glass in the time rotor has improved refraction effects, and the master screwdriver is still here from episode 3. Now for the main event, the bigger on the inside effect. Now, bear in mind, our ability to look at the inner workings of the adventure games is limited, so the explanation for this effect will still be based in deduction and educated guesses rather than using clear-cut information straight from the game files. But in broad strokes, this is a portal that you pass through. It's the same portal system that's used for the dimensional lesions you need to close throughout the game, though this system was created specifically with the TARDIS in mind first and evidently repurposed for the legions, possibly to amortize the development time. And it did take a long time. Despite being worked on well beforehand, it took until the last episode of the adventure games to finally see the light of day. It would appear this system can only show one portal at any given time, and I say that because in this part where the portal system is being used for the TARDIS doors, it comes at the cost of the lesion that's nearby being downgraded to a flat image texture. All the other lesions in this game make use of the portal effect, but again, only one instance of it is ever on screen at any given moment. How this effect is done would appear to be rather like the game called Portal, a flat plane which instead of having an image texture has the live output of a different camera that's mimicking the angle of the player's camera in the equivalent location at the opposite end of the portal. When you cross the threshold, you get teleported into the real console room set, and now the view outside the doors is the portal showing the location where you just teleported in from. The most quietly clever part about this that you might not even notice is the elegant solution to the problem posed by the third-person camera. When you think about what would happen if the player gets teleported as soon as they cross the threshold with the camera a couple paces behind them, the camera would surely be able to see the change in environment, but that doesn't happen. Instead, the camera moves in to hover closer over our shoulder as we approach the portal, so when the player crosses the teleport threshold, the camera is right there with us, not far enough away to see the surrounding environment change behind us and spoil the effect. But this doesn't come across as intrusive or an obvious workaround, it just looks like the camera helpfully moving in closer as we approach the cramped space of the doorway, which is something the camera in these games already do. It's a nice, clean solution so subtle that you ideally won't notice it's even solving a problem, but with it in mind, we can see how the camera is definitely moving inward here. It's really quite a well done effect, though if you're determined to mess things up, it is quite easy to confuse the portal teleportation, which causes glitches like this. This is the skybox outside the TARDIS used in the opening cutscene, which has been changed from the nebula skybox that it was before. So, there you have it. More information than anyone will ever need on the subtle iterations of the adventure game's TARDIS interior set. But before we go, here's one last usage of this TARDIS interior set that you may already be familiar with without realizing. It's the model used in the animated menu for Series 5 of Doctor Who on disc. Specifically, it's the version that was used in the beta build of City of the Daleks. And if you want something you'll never be able to unsee, it looks like someone used Subdivision to smooth out the surfaces and improve the details, which had the unfortunate side effect of cutting off the corners of this transparent plane with the scissor lift texture on it holding the scanner screen. Oops.